Hey folks, I'm Spencer, and on today's episode of Cult Mania, we're stepping into the disturbing sci-fi world of Brandon Cronenberg's Possessor. In Possessor, Andrew Riseborough plays Voss. Voss is a hit man, hit woman, hit person, but not your everyday sort of hitman. Rather than doing the killing themselves, Voss sort of possesses someone else, someone who has sort of perhaps a motive to kill that person, and uses them to do it, basically. She controls their mind, their body, into doing the killing. And then the plan is you go in, you kill the person, you execute the fake, the body, and return to your body, which is a very effective method, but it leaves behind issues in the brain because obviously you are in someone else's brain. And these issues begin to manifest when Voss takes over Colin, played by Christopher Abbott. She's got to do this big job, like kill this business CEO, but clearly being inside Colin's brain is not working out very well, and it starts to become who's really in control of this body. Now, Andrew Riseborough is brilliant in this, but I mean, you didn't really need me to tell you that because she's brilliant in most things. And she is, for my money, one of the best people working in sort of strange genre cinema at the moment. She's brilliant at doing this sort of world-weary performance where, you really get the sense that she, as Voss, has been, she's been doing this for far too long. She doesn't really want to be doing this anymore, but, it's all she knows. I also think Jennifer Jason Leigh is really good in this film. She is Voss's sort of handler, the person who arranges the hits, and she does that perfect sort of spy movie thing of she's the person that Voss has to trust and that as an audience you have to trust, but you just always have this sort of nagging sense in the back of your mind, like, do I fully trust you? Do you have everyone's best interests at heart? And she balances that really well without being like, I am so evil. That, there is always just this sort of, are you the right, do I trust you? Don't I trust you? Whereas I think if, it would be very easy to step into, I'm a goodie, or I am evil. Christopher Abbott probably gives the best performance in this film, though, because he has a very, very, very difficult job because he has got to be someone who is inside someone else's body, pretending to be that person, whilst also occasionally having to be the person that is inside the body, and also having to, at times, feel like the person whose body it is coming out and their personality is showing through. And sometimes having to do all of those different things in one scene. And the fact that I think he actually manages to pull that off, that you do get the sense of all these different characters and personalities coming through, is really, really impressive.
You'll be binding to Colin Tate.
We can't afford any mistakes on this one.
The film visually is a real treat. It has plenty of strange, trippy sequences, which are something, I'm a massive fan of. Lots of, strange... There's a lot of shots where you presume that the lens isn't attached to the camera. It does that sort of weird warping effect. There are some bits that sort of go kaleidoscopic. There is a lot of strobing in this. That is something I will flag up. It looks awesome, but, if strobe lights are something that have an effect on you, be warned, there is a lot, and it's in a lot of the sort of big key sequences, so it's not something you're going to sort of dodge around. But even outside of the big sort of in-your-face sort of statement set pieces, the cinematography still manages to be very interesting and very uneasy. A lot of the times characters are framed in the side 2/3 of the screen, or in the bottom third of the screen, and often in a way that like people are facing strange directions based on where they've been placed in the frame, and I think it's really good for making you just feel like something is off, something doesn't feel right, because you aren't putting people's faces where they should be in a traditional frame. As well, cinematographer Karim Hussein has managed to capture this sort of brilliantly cold, icy feeling. Despite the fact that yellows and oranges are sort of prominent colours, the film always has this sort of slightly off, slightly just cold, unpleasant quality to it, in a way that manages to still feel striking and impressive. This is helped a large amount as well by sort of some great set design. There's some sort of fantastic sort of brutalist architecture in one bit. There are very sort of sci-fi moments. There's some big screens, some big high-rise buildings that look great. There's a very decadent house, but also it comes down to how like the props have been designed. They have this very sort of 70s, like especially sort of mid to late 70s era vibe around a lot of the props. There are lots of buttons and switches that the sort of plastic they're made out of just sort of harkens back to equipment that you just wouldn't see anymore. Old TVs, old radios. There's a sort of device that they use to sort of bring you back in line in the body, and it's this sort of worn leather sort of rectangle with a big dial on it that just looks so out of place for this sort of near future setting that the film has, but it works incredibly well. And I think in large part Brandon Cronenberg is sort of harking back to the films that sort of perhaps made his father so famous, sort of Rabid, Shivers era. And I think as well there is a very clear nod to Videodrome in the helmet that Voss has to wear when she's possessing people. It's got very much that sort of vibe. The film goes very heavy on practical effects as well. There's a lot of bits where you could have done that with CGI, but it's been done with practical, and they work incredibly well. There's this fantastic sort of trippy, very drippy, melty sequence to do with the possession of a person, and it's fantastic. It's a really, really bizarre visual treat. It's so good. And I mean, gore in this is something that a lot of people have been talking about with good reason. I mean, if you see this in the uncut form, this is an incredibly brutal film at times. There is, some very, very nasty violence in this, in a good way. It's a film that I think, because people have been talking so much about the gore, I think it gives you the sense that it's this like rampage through gore. It isn't. It uses violence sporadically, but in a very, very intense way that I think, those sequences hit with maximum impact because they are standout moments. They are, you've waited for them to come, and then they are full on in the best possible way. Also, if you see in the uncut version, there's a lot of Willy in this, including a very sort of brilliantly used sort of bit of bait and switch with a Willy that's very good.
What's with you today?
What do you mean?
The score for Possessor is done by Jim Williams, who I'm a massive fan of. He did Kill List and Raw and Field in England. He's very, very good at creepy scores, and Possessor is no different. It's a predominantly sort of electronic score, strange sort of droning sounds. There are some strings in there, and there's also this sort of, to me, it sounded like a very sort of throbbing gristle infused sort of brass instrument. Even if it's a synthesized brass, it's got that vibe. It's very sort of disconcerting, very uncomfortable, and I think it does a very good job of creating this sense of being within someone else's body, in someone else's mind. There is a lot of sort of reverb and delay, sort of this sort of echo chamber that does make you feel like you are inside of someone or inside something, and I think it just makes it feel odd and creepy. And I think, a lot of, the film needs that score and its cinematography to help build its tone, because on paper, this sort of possessing people through a scientific, strange machine and surgery feels very sci-fi. It feels, there is a very, you could easily make a straight sci-fi action film out of this concept. But the film very much feels like a horror film because of this unsettled score, this way the camera sort of just gets into weird positions that make you just think this isn't nice. And then that means that when the effects happen, they feel nasty or uncomfortable rather than sort of spectacular. Because they are spectacular, but that's not the feeling that you get from it.
You have a very special nature. One we've worked hard together to unlock.
I do have a couple of things that I'm not so keen on. I know this has been very gushing so far. And it's quite annoying that one of the things that I found a problem with the film is something that people have always levelled at David Cronenberg's films. It's a very cold film. It's a very distant film. It has a very nihilistic view of life. Its characters are very nihilistic. They're on a downward spiral. The problem is that you meet your characters very, very far down that downward spiral, and it gives a few reasons that those characters could claw their way back out of this, but they don't feel like enough. You sort of go into the film going, there is no way of these people coming back, and it makes it very difficult for you to engage with them on a sort of emotional level. I always felt quite removed from the action. I didn't particularly care what happened to the characters, which is a shame because the performances, as I said, are very, very good. It's just, I felt like there was this wall between me and the characters. My other criticism is the film has a lot of ideas going on. It doesn't always fully explain them. There were a few points where I was like, this is a very cool sequence, but I don't really understand what is happening, what the purpose of this is. There's one very key bit that does feel like it's in there for a bit of shock value and because it's a cool image, but it doesn't 100%. I wasn't really sure why it was there. And yet, there's a bit that I wish was more ambiguous than it was. There was something that happened that I was like, that's going to be one of those things where an audience are going to have to interpret that. And then it sort of explained it. And I was a bit disappointed in that. I kind of wanted some things explained to me more and other things less. And that was a bit of a problem. Especially because these two things I think I really enjoyed it. I still really enjoyed the film on this first viewing. I'm kind of worried that if I saw it a couple of times, these things might become a bit more of an issue because I'm so sort of in love with the form of the film, but I don't know if the actual content is as strong as I want it to be.
That small thought. It's all it takes.
That being said, I find it very hard not to recommend Possessor. If you've got a stomach for the gore and you want to see, you know, if you want to enjoy the fantastic world that has been built through the cinematography, through a lot of the concepts, you know, there are some really interesting ideas going on in the film. The score is fantastic, those effects are fantastic, there are sequences that, you know, you can pick apart, and we'll probably get into loads of like uni student dissertations because they're fantastic sequences. Then it is it is definitely worth a watch. Is it going to be something that an audience are going to return to over and over and over again? I'm not 100% sold on that. But as a first time watch, it is incredibly powerful. And Brandon Cronenberg said that there is a second script's worth of ideas that he had to cut from Possessor. And I would very much like to see a sequel or something else set in this world, because I think all of the ideas are brilliant and it has such a sense of world. I want perhaps a second one that nails its story and its characters in the way that it nails pretty much everything else. So overall, it's definitely worth a watch. Just perhaps temper your expectations that I don't think it is perhaps the instant classic that I think some reviewers have made it out to be. But that is just my opinion. What do you think of Possessor? Is it something you want to see? Is it something you've seen? How did you feel about it? Let me know down in the comments. Like and subscribe so you don't miss any more videos. And I shall see you next time.